back in 2020 in COVID, the Lions finished 5-11 and fired Matt Patricia, former Patriots defensive coordinator, as their head coach, and ushered in a whole new era, hiring new GM Brad Holmes over from the LA Rams and Dan Campbell, a tight ends coach from the New Orleans Saints. And this ushered in an entire new era of the Detroit Lions that's marked their identity for the past 5 or 6 years. As we can see by their records, we've seen a lot of great growth, great draft picks, great success, great development with that Detroit Lions franchise. And now this past year in the season of 2025 was the first time that we saw a regression year with their franchise finishing 9-8, which was good enough to get third in the division, and unfortunately missed out on the playoffs. And unfortunately, more than that, a lot of fans had much loftier expectations for this team, this franchise, and what they were supposed to do this upcoming year. And what I want to spend some time doing today in this video is let's talk about why that may be the case, why that may have happened, and let's look at the future and what is going on. Why is Brad Holmes making the moves that he's doing, and how does this set up the future of the Detroit Lions? So what I want to start this with talking about is I want to go back a year. I just want to move back 1 year. So as we know, last season, going into the start of last season, the Chicago Bears hired Ben Johnson to be their head coach, and the New York Jets hired Aaron Glenn to be their head coach, which means that we not only lost our offensive coordinator, who was an amazing offensive mind, but we lost our defensive coordinator, who really uplifted a team that had some pretty underwhelming or young and developmental talent that wasn't really a premier defense in the NFL in Aaron Glenn. So our entire foundation had been kind of taken away from us here. And what I want to highlight here is when this shift happened, when we lost Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, it wasn't just those two. In fact, in one offseason, the Detroit Lions lost 8 total coaches. So we lost Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson. Then on top of that, Antoine Randall left with JT Barrett to go join up with Ben Johnson. Then on top of that, we lost Tanner Engstrand and Steve Hyden to go join up with Aaron Glenn over in the Jets. And then on top of that, we lost Terrell Williams, who went to the Patriots, and Cameron Davis, who just outright left the team, as you can see evidence in the article right here. So in one single offseason, we lost 8 total coaches, whether it's position coaches or head coaches or assistant coaches that were close. Like, we lost an entire foundation, an entire culture, which means going into this season for 2026, Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn not only had to, rebuild this team and get more talent into the roster, but also find guys that fit what we're trying to do here, that fit the culture of what's going on here, and replace 8 position coaches. And I think the part of this that people forget about when we're talking about roster construction, we're talking about building a team, building a foundation, building a culture, is that the coaches matter. Like, when we're in our position meetings, those position coaches are the boots on the ground guys that our quarterbacks, our running backs, our wide receivers are so closely connected to, that they're having those nuanced conversations with. So to lose those guys is a real gut punch, more than people tend to realize. These offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators have to look at the offense and the defense much more holistically. So they're not in those specific meetings nearly as much. So this was an entire change for the entire offseason. So just that alone, looking at the performance that we saw from the Detroit Lions, there's bound to be some natural growing pains that come with that. And, part of that process that happened is we kind of have to learn a new process. And of course, after this past year and, the things that we saw from the staff, you saw that Dan Campbell started to recognize that and fired Horton, who was our promoted offensive coordinator, our offensive mind. And instead, we ushered in a new era now this upcoming season. We've hired Drew Petzing, who is the offensive coordinator formerly with the Arizona Cardinals, which has a lot of Lions fans shaking their heads. They look at the performance that the Arizona Cardinals have had over the past couple of years, and they're like, hey, is this Drew Petzing guy really going to be something that actually makes our team better? And that's where I want to start this conversation, is I want to talk a little bit more about the offense. I want to talk a little bit about the defense, and then just kind of give some suggestions as we lead up to the NFL draft that's coming soon at the end of this month, and what direction I think that the Detroit Lions should really look at as they continue to build this roster and bring in talent to fill their needs. So let's start with the offense. So, of course, there's a lot of questions about who is this guy, Drew Petzing? What is he about? What does he like to do? And what I think a lot of people fail to realize is while there is an offensive philosophy that the offensive coordinator is aiming to do, you also have to be able to accommodate to the talent that you have. And I think that summarizes perfectly the situation that Arizona was in over the past couple of years under Petzing with that offense. Is Petzing was one of the founding fathers of 12 personnel, 13 personnel formations, which is kind of a fixture in the NFL today when you think about it. So for those of you who don't know what 12 personnel and 13 personnel is it's talking about how many running backs and how many tight ends are in that formation. So in a 12 personnel, you have one running back and you have two tight ends. In a 13 personnel, we're talking about three tight ends and one running back. And these two formations are very common in early down situations, which are predominantly viewed as run-heavy situations. So Drew Petzing has adopted a philosophy that's really about building our roster out of playing in this 12 personnel, 13 personnel, and emphasizing the run. And in fact, Drew Petzing wants to run the ball as much as possible. He wants to be able to say that at the end of the season, he has adopted one of the most profound run offenses in the league. That's his philosophy. And I pulled up this article just to really emphasize that. So this is just an article, just a closer understanding of Drew Petzing's offense and what he likes to do. And I'll link this in the bio for all of you guys to go and check out. Run the football preferably out of 12. So one running back, two tight ends, and 13, one running back, three tight end. Mix in a little bit of RPO and play action, and I'll certainly talk about why play action especially. And then mostly 11 personnel out of spread type formation. Absolutely. So once again, we're talking one tight end and one running back, which is going to lead to more wide receivers out on the field to spread the ball out, create more space, create more separation in more pass-heavy situations, which passing downs are kind of that third and fourth down that we see, or second and long situations. But once again, you look at, among top five in run percentage, this is the goal that Drew Petzing wants to be able to do. He wants to be in this category of these top five teams of run percentage in their offense. And you look at what Detroit has on their roster, Jahmyr Gibbs, who is an unbelievable talent, one of the best running backs in the NFL, paired with recent free agent signing Isaiah Pacheco, who is an absolute bruiser, who absolutely adopts that same type of physicality that Detroit likes to have. You start to see we're building a roster that aligns with what Drew Petzing wants to do. And then on top of that, they signed Tyler Conklin in free agency, adding a third tight end. So a lot of fans were probably shaking their head like, why are we spending all this money on a third tight end when there's so many other positions, especially on the side of the defense, that we need? But now you look at, if we're going to be running a lot of 12 personnel, 13 personnel stuff, and you're going to have Sam Laporta, Brock Wright, who did a great job as a blocking tight end with some receiving upside last year, and then you now add in Tyler Conklin, who's got a lot more receiving upside, and is still a serviceable run blocker. You've now got some depth at that tight end position to allow us to better use these 12 personnel, 13 personnel formations, which is exactly what he wants to do. So when I look at this Drew Petzing hire, I not only look at what he likes to do, but we start to look at who are these free agency signings that Brad Holmes is prioritizing and bringing into this team, so that way everybody's together in alignment. And that's why I bring up the difference between the quarterback and the head coach, because when you have Kyler Murray as a quarterback down in Arizona, Kyler Murray is a quarterback who likes to be able to use his legs to create opportunities. So when you have a quarterback that likes to scramble, that likes to create opportunities for himself. And then on top of that, a quarterback who is very undersized at the quarterback position. He needs to be able to see over that offensive line, and if he can't, he needs to be able to have lanes where he can see his receivers and make those throws. So because of that, just by virtue of who Kyler Murray is as a quarterback and what his skill set is, you naturally have to adopt a lot more shotgun-based formations, which kind of contradicts a lot of the things that Petzing wants to do. He wants to be directly under center on those early downs. He wants to emphasize running the ball, which Arizona really has not had a good running back in that franchise the entire time that Petzing's been there. And they want to be able to do play action stuff off of that. And the other part of this that I think a lot of people don't talk about is Petzing really has a lot of similarities to what we see in West Coast offenses, which have had a unbelievably good success in the NFL. We look at Sean McVay with the Los Angeles Rams. We look at Kyle Shanahan with the San Francisco 49ers. These teams, when you have a West Coast offense, it's a lot more about having a variety of different plays out of the same formation than having a million different formations for a million different plays. So for that same reason, it makes your offense a little bit more complex. However, it makes it much more unpredictable for a defense. When you're seeing all of the same formations, but there's a million different plays or things that can happen out of that formation, it makes it a lot harder to, one, determine what type of personnel you're going to need out there on the field at that time, and two, figure out what the best matchup is going to be for any given play. And when we look at Petzing's success rate, while Arizona didn't have the greatest seasons when Petzing was there, funny enough, when you look at the statistics and you crunch the numbers, when Petzing was operating out of 12 personnel or 13 personnel situations, not only did he do it at a higher clip than every other team in the NFL except for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but he did it at a higher success rate than every other team in the NFL. So when you get Petzing in these situations that he's comfortable with, in an offensive philosophy that he wants to do, he's successful at it. So when we look at the Lions roster construction, a team that really didn't have a lot of money to spend this past offseason, we need to do what we can to fill this roster with players that align with that philosophy, that skill set, and allow Petzing to do what he does best. And I think it starts at the quarterback position, and we start to look at this roster that we have. So the differences that we see with Jared Goff versus Kyler Murray is Jared Goff is not a scrambler. He's not a person who's going to try and have designated run opportunities to create with his legs. Jared Goff is a quarterback that likes to operate in the pocket. He likes to operate under center, and he likes to read the field and make the right play. And that is exactly what aligns with a Drew Petzing type of offense. We go to the running back position. We've got, Jahmyr Gibbs and Isaiah Pacheco, who have different skill sets. Isaiah Pacheco is more of your bruiser, ground and pound running back. Gibbs, you can do a lot of stuff in the receiving game. You can do a lot more outside creation stuff. He can create with his legs and do so many different things to make guys miss and really force people to go east and west. And then you look at your wide receivers. You've got Amon-Ra in the slot, who's a very physical wide receiver who is absolutely willing to get involved in the run blocking game, which is a priority of a Drew Petzing offense. You've got Jamison Williams, who's your deep threat, who can really make people miss, especially if we're in the play action game. And then similarly, you've got Isaac Tesla, who is rather underutilized, I think, in his rookie year last year, but with certain departures that have happened this past offseason, we're going to see a lot more growth in what he can do this year. And even though he had minimal targets, there was like 4 or 5 of them that were end zone targets. He's such a contested catch guy. He's going to reel in a lot of end zone related targets, and he's going to cause a lot of problems for defenses while also being, I believe, 6'4", like 215. Like, he's going to be able to help out in that run game as well. So we're building a really physical team that's not afraid to block, that's really going to emphasize the run. And we see that across our offensive line with guys that aren't afraid to really get physical in the run game. I think the big liability that we're seeing across this offensive line is probably at that left tackle position with Larry Borum. He's never really been in a full-time role with a team. He's kind of been a interchangeable, versatile, pivotal piece based off schematics. So to see him in a full-time role, I'm curious to see, and I'm a little nervous about. But aside from that, we've got guys that are good run blockers. We want to emphasize the run. We want to get physical. And on top of that, instead of trying to go and get splashy big name free agents, we focused on building depth, right? We brought in Cade Mays, who to play center on a multi-year deal, and he's going to be a great fixture there. Even if we end up drafting a guy, he's going to be a mainstay in this offense, and he's still young. He's developmental. Let's go Vols. I love the Tennessee Volunteers. That's my team. But on top of that, we signed Ben Barch in free agency. We traded for Juice Scruggs from the Houston Texans. On top of that, Christian Mahogany's coming back. He's young. He's developmental. He had a little bit of injuries last year, but he's coming back. And then we signed Larry Borum. You know, even in the event of injuries, which plagued this team last year, we were building so much depth across this roster, across this offense specifically, that I think is going to benefit us in the long haul. I think the biggest knock that we're going to have philosophically with the entire Lions team is just this fight through the pain mentality that Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes have really institutionalized with this team. I think that could definitely lead to a lot of lingering injuries with this team, and it's certainly something that we've seen happen, especially last year. So I think moving forward, if they're a little bit better about really having guys wait till they're 100% before they come back on the field and play, I think that could really benefit this team a lot more. But I think that's kind of an institutionalized mindset within this franchise of, you know, we're a really physical, ground and pound, gritty team. That's what we do. That's what we're about. But while a lot of people are hesitant about Drew Petzing as a hire, it aligns so seamlessly with what this offense is trying to do. And it takes a burden off Dan Campbell, who really had to step in last year and become a play caller because Morton wasn't getting the job done, right? So it allows Dan Campbell to take a step back, focus on the decision-making process of being a head coach, and let Petzing be our play caller. Let him be a pure offensive mind. Which leads me to the defense. And I think there's a resounding theme that we see with the coaching moves with the Detroit Lions this year that I really love. So Kelvin Shepard obviously was promoted to defensive coordinator after Aaron Glenn left to become the Jets head coach. And what Aaron Glenn really institutionalized with the Lions franchise was very similar to what Petzing does with his offenses. Instead of having a million different formations and trying to figure out what personnel is the offense sending out and how can we build a collection of guys to match up with that, Aaron Glenn was more, we're going to primarily operate out of our 4-3 base coverage, and we're going to have a lot of variations off of how we use personnel within that 4-3 base coverage to match up against whatever is in front of us. And when we look at defenses, the Lions, they operated out of their base defensive formation more than any other team in the NFL aside from the Los Angeles Rams. So for them, it allowed them to maximize the talent that they have on the field, right? So for them, it's we want our best players to be on the field as much as they can be. And part of that, I think, meant that they were really not focusing as much on their depth. It was very top-heavy the way they went about things, and then it kind of got magnified when people got injured because you don't have that depth to turn to. So you kind of have to just roll with the guys that you have and make it work. So for both of those reasons, they predominantly operated out of that base defensive formation more than anybody. But when you're operating out of just one formation but have so many different variations, so many different things that can happen out of that 4-3 base, it makes it very hard for an offense to try and read that defense and figure out what's going on, what are they trying to do, how are they trying to match up with things, and it can create so many different matchup nightmares for an offense as well. So for that same reason, we start to see a complete culture change where everybody's kind of on that same mindset of let's focus on doing the formations that we know that we want to do really well, and let's confuse the other side by having so many different options, variations, and things that we can do with that, and let's bring in talent on this team that can be very versatile, that can match up against a variety of different positions, that can really go and make plays against anybody, whether it's tight ends, whether it's wide receivers, whether it's, you know, a running back out of the backfield. What do we need to do? And when we look at roster construction here, I do think that there's opportunities to continue addressing things in the NFL draft. And of course, that's coming later this month. But, you know, we had Aiden Hutchinson, who is dealing with a lot this past season with the broken leg situation, and we're glad to have him back and healthy. And that's certainly going to make what we do on defense much better. I think we really struggled this past year in getting after the quarterback and getting them into uncomfortable situations, which continued to put pressure on our defensive backs, which was an already very thin position because of injuries. Terrion Arnold was injured. Kirby Joseph was injured. Brian Branch was injured. And then a lot of the guys that were there, Carlton Davis, is an aging guy. We unfortunately lost in free agency. They moved on to greener pastures. So Aiden Hutchinson coming back is going to really help this defense moving forward. They really invested into their defensive tackles because, as we said, they run a base 4-3, and they run it a lot. So they need defensive tackles that can rotate in and out constantly. So having a depth of 3 guys that can really go out there and make plays between Aleem McNeil, who I will say is a little overpaid, Live Anzarike, who's been a little injury prone, but has been really good, and then Tyleek Williams, our first-round draft pick from last year, who's a really good run stopper. We've got some depth now at that position. And I think when you talk with most people on the outside looking in about where do we need to address most with this Lions team, it all revolves around this defense. And I think specifically you get to 2 positions. You get to defensive back and you get to an edge rusher. And we look at that other side away from Aiden Hutchinson, there's been a lot of trial by fire. So we had Hussan last year, who did really well. He was a 10-plus sack guy. However, I think what the Lions really struggle with outside of Hutchinson isn't as much about getting after the quarterback. While that's important, I think our biggest problem was contain on the edge. We need a guy on the other side who isn't necessarily a guy who can get after the quarterback. That's a benefit. We need to get after the quarterback. But I think the bigger need is we need to stop people from taking us out by just getting to the outside. Whether it's a scrambling quarterback scrambling to that outside or stretch run plays or outside zone schemes that get to the boundary there, that's where we're most liable. Because when we look at our cornerbacks, we've got a lot of undersized guys. So DJ Reed here, is he, what's he, 5'9", 190? He's an undersized guy. We look at Terrion Arnold, another one. He's 6 foot. He's a little bit bigger. We wanted him to operate out of the nickel to be that physical run stopper, and he just really hasn't taken off to be able to do that. We've brought in Roger McCreary, another under 6 foot guy, 5'11". Ennis Rakestraw, who we drafted, 5'11". We're very undersized at that cornerback position. So if a guy gets to the outside on us, if we're unable to have that contain, especially in the run game or a quarterback scrambling out, then our defense is held very liable, and it puts us in a really tough situation. And what I also want to emphasize when we look at this defense and the way that it's set up, where that becomes a concern, is this is a coverage matrix from the Detroit Lions back in 2024, where this all was really getting going under Aaron Glenn. We ran so much cover one. So for those who don't know what cover one is when you have a single high safety, which for us was Kirby Joseph. He was our designated playmaker, center fielder over there. He was just great as a ball hawk, trying to go out and make interceptions, make plays, and he really did that. I think he led the NFL in interceptions a couple years back, and he flourished in that role, which allowed us to take Brian Branch, our other safety, and play him much more in the box, closer to the line of scrimmage, matching up in pass coverage against tight ends, slot receivers, taking running backs if they drift out on screen passes or on outside runs. And it really covered up that blemish for us where Brian Branch could operate in a much more hybrid role that we've seen really become normalized in the NFL with guys like Nick Emanwari and Kyle Hamilton. But the problem with that is when you're operating out of a cover one is you really need the guys to win their matchup or to stick with the guys that they're designated to match up with. And that was the biggest liability that we ran into is we had guys on our team, whether it be at linebacker, at cornerback, at safety, wherever it may have been, that just couldn't hang with the talent that was in front of them, whether it be injuries, whether it be the individual matchups. We didn't have guys that were versatile enough to take on those different types of matchups. So when we look at roster construction, once again, the guys that we've brought in to help with this, we look at Jack Campbell, who's really come into his own, one of the best off-ball linebackers in the NFL today. He's huge. I think he's, 6'4", 6'5", something like that. Let's see what it tells us here. 6'5", 246. Got plenty of size to be able to match up against tight ends, plenty of speed to get east and west, north and south, to get involved in those run game and in outside coverage schemes. And then we've got Malcolm Rodriguez, who we're bringing back to the team, a guy that we drafted as an off-ball guy out of Oklahoma State, who really helped us out in a variety of different pass coverage situations. And we're maintaining Derek Barnes, but unfortunately he's getting up there in age. So we took a flyer on a guy for real cheap in Damone Clark, who's unbelievably athletic, who had a great year with the Cowboys just a few years ago and has just unfortunately battled injuries. So I think this is more a glass half full type of situation where we look at Damone Clark and what he brings to this team, and we're banking on, if we can keep this guy healthy, he can be such a versatile athletic piece to this team. And I think a lot of how Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah has been such a vital role for the Cleveland Browns the last couple of years. And for them this upcoming year now, with him dealing with his medical issues, it's certainly going to be feeling the pressure of that. So when I look at this Lions team and you look at the way that it's been built after replacing all of these coaches that have inevitably left in the offseason, you can start to see that Brad Holmes, while he doesn't have a lot of money to spend, is really intentional about getting guys that align with our philosophy, what our coaching staff does well, and what we want to be able to do as a Detroit Lions franchise. And when we look at the draft and the holes that I still think that they need to address, I think there's two main ones that I really see. I think another one would be getting some sort of offensive lineman, whether it's interior, outside guy, just get another young, talented offensive lineman in the draft. I look at Monroe Freeling, who's been mocked to the Lions countless times. I think he would be a great fit to just compete with Larry Borom up here to really figure out who's our guy there. Another one is I look at off-ball linebacker. We just don't have a lot of depth there. While we have Damone Clark, that's the only depth that we have at the position. So a guy in the second round that I'm a huge fan of is Anthony Hill Jr., linebacker out of Texas. He was a guy that everybody going into the mocks early in the year said was going to be a first-round, like, top 10 guy, and just had a down year at Texas, but has been playing in so many different types of formations, has been used as a blitzer, has been used as an edge, has been used as an off-ball guy, has matched up against tight ends, running backs, wide receivers. He's got such a versatile skill set that I think aligns with exactly what Kelvin Shepard and this Detroit Lions team wants to do. But I'm very excited to see what the Lions have in store for themselves, and I'm certainly optimistic about the future, and I'm going to continue rooting for them. And I think we're set up to be in a spot to compete for better than third in this division. But let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are about this team, and I look forward to talking more with you in the comment section. But like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.